Hey, Paul Mack here. Maybe you've got a thick wooded property like this that you would like to turn into nice pasture land like this for livestock or hay. Then keep watching. Today we're going to talk about inexpensive, simple ways to go from woods like this to pasture land like this in the least amount of time possible. You know, I've always enjoyed burning a good brush pile like this one, but let me tell you something. This one is kind of special to me, a little bit sentimental, because this fire represents the culmination of a few years' work in turning this part of my property right here into pasture. Because let me tell you something. When we first moved onto this property, this whole thing was wooded with dense young growth, old growth, briars, vines. You couldn't even look 12 feet ahead of you for all the briars and all the dense growth. I couldn't even see the lay of the land. And I knew that I needed some pasture land for livestock, for my milk cows, and eventually for hay, and some land for garden and crop raising. So how do you go about clearing thick wooded land to get to pasture that you need for farming purposes? Of course, you could hire somebody to come in with heavy equipment and get everything done within a matter of days, really hours with heavy equipment. But not many of us can afford that. So I had to figure out a way that one person could clear as much land as possible in a short amount of time and in the most inexpensive way possible. And I've got a few tips to show you that I've learned along the way. So the first thing I did was to clear about a 30-foot right-of-way to get our electricity in to where we were going to build our house. And that was a lot of work. It was clearing little trees and briars along with a few big trees for that 30-foot right-of-way that the utility company required. Well, from that point forward, since this is where my pasture was going to be, I started spreading that out and increasing that right of way little by little. Now, even though I didn't have any grass to feed livestock, one of the first things I did to this property that I wanted to turn from woods into pasture was go about with some electric fence, just 17 gauge wire. I made my own insulators out of PVC pipe and run this wire a lot of times just from tree to tree. If I needed a post somewhere, I'd drive a post in the ground, put the insulators on it. At first I ran 4 wires. Eventually I ran 2 wires for cows. But a lot of times all I need is 1 wire about nose high, especially to keep the adults in. Started rotating them in that wooded area, and you know what? Cows do a big job of eating a lot of leaves and actually killing the briars. As they're moving through the woods, they don't even feel those briars like we do, and they pull them down. If the briars are up in the trees, they pull them down, and pretty soon the briars they don't have a chance. They die. And then I'm able to walk through, even though it's still a thick wood, I'm able to walk through it without the briars. So the cows really do a big job of helping to clear the land while they're eating some meals out there. First, I would focus my attention on the smaller trees, things that I could do pretty quickly. And here's what I did with the smaller trees. It wasn't very conventional. I would cut them at about knee high and leave the stumps, although it didn't look very good. And here's why. When you leave that stump at about knee level, in about 2 to 3 years, it rots. Fire ants play a big role in it. We all hate fire ants, but there's at least one benefit to fire ants. They eat a lot of refuse, and especially roots, that weaken that stump. And imagine this, if I had cut that stump at, just slightly above ground level, then weeds would grow up, grass would grow up, and I might come along and top the weeds and top the grass with a bush hog or something and accidentally hit those stumps because I can't see them. Well, if you leave the stumps knee high, they're obvious to see, and then in about 2 or 3 years, they've rotted, and you can actually push those over many times with your hands. They're so weak, and get that stump out, root and all, and then you've got perfect land to bush hog over. You won't hit a thing. Another thing that was in my benefit is I happened to have a bull at the time that would walk alongside small trees, and with his neck he figured out how to bend them over, and as he was walking along the tree he would eat the leaves off, eventually killing the trees, which kind of did me a favor. I was left with a bunch of woods with bent over trees that was quite easy after that point to come along with a chainsaw and saw it up into firewood size lengths, get those out of there, and then leave the stump part to where it would rot. After the smaller trees are gone, I turn my attention to the bigger ones, the medium-sized trees, the larger trees. If they're really nice shaped trees, nice and straight, especially the pines, I might save those for sawing up, for milling up, making into lumber. If they're not quite so desirable, I'll save that wood for firewood. Just cut it up into firewood, split it if it's big enough, and then cut the limbs for smaller fire starting type wood. And that takes care of the larger trees. Again, I would leave a stump so that it's very visible and it's not hidden, and I'm not going to run over it with a tractor. If I take the stump all the way to the ground, I'm careful to saw it in such a way that it's turtle shaped. It's kind of like a turtle shell, so that if I'm mowing over it, I won't actually hit the stump. It's not got large sticking up edges. And I'm careful to watch the low areas of the pasture, areas where the rain might drain quickly and run on a certain path. In those areas, especially the low, wet areas, I tend to leave trees that are already growing there, whether they're big or small, because that'll help prevent erosion. And it gives the cattle some shade so that they're not just in a paddock that has no trees, no shade whatsoever. Now, this video is sponsored by me. And speaking of trees, you might want to take a look at my book, Common Trees and Their Use for the Small Farm or Homestead. This is a book that is not only a book that tells what trees are good for what uses on the farm, like for fence posts or for making handles or whatever. Get this, it's also an identification book that you could actually take out into the field and tell what tree is what. It takes several trees that are common throughout North America and shows not only the leaf and what the leaf looks like, but also the trunk, so that you can be able to tell what tree is what and learn the difference between the different species just by looking at the bark in winter if there's no leaf at all. So, Common Trees and Their Use for the Small Farm or Homestead. Find my website, farmhandscompanion.com. Go down to the general store section and you can see several things that we have for sale there, and my book about building pole barns. Take a look. That's farmhandscompanion.com. As this whole process goes, especially in wintertime when I need to feed the cows, extra hay and there's not enough grass to sustain them, especially in those early years where there's not much grass growing, I'll put out their hay bales in various spots with a ring around them, and sometimes I'll even, if it's loose hay, like from square bales, I might sprinkle that loose hay in different areas, especially on brush piles or whatever, because those seeds are going to fall out of there and it's going to start new grass growth in my pasture. It's not like I've got to go and buy a bunch of expensive grass seed to get grass started in a pasture. Most of the time when you clear wooded land, it's not very long after that native grasses just pop up, it seems, almost out of nowhere. Well, I suppose those native grass seeds are laying dormant there. They're scattered by birds and everything for, that's been going on for decades. So as soon as the trees are taken out of the way and the light hits the ground and warms it up, those grass seeds, native seeds, begin to germinate, and pretty soon you've got all types of grasses growing here. And really, you know what? It's best to let whatever native grass wants to grow on your property, let it grow there, because that's the area it's been used to for decades and decades, hundreds of years. So once you get native grasses established, all you got to do is encourage them and help them. Of course, a lot of the seed from whatever hay you're buying is going to be introduced into your pasture, and that's good too. Now, occasionally I might add a few seeds like maybe white clover, occasionally some crimson clover. I generally will buy a little package of that, and I might in February, March, late winter, very early spring, kind of sprinkle it, not real thick, but just sprinkle it here, there, and yonder, and you'll end up having patches of clover that pop up. And once those get established and start putting off flower heads, which incidentally the bees love, especially honeybees, those flowers will put off their own seed, and that Dutch clover, that white clover, will spread by the roots. The crimson clover, once it gets established, will pretty much reseed itself annually. And then you'll have nice little areas of clover to complement your other native grasses. Clover, which is a legume, nitrogen fixing, is actually a great companion plant for your other warm weather grasses like Bermuda or Bahia, which I have plenty of here. Now for the first year, second year, third year, while those native grasses are beginning to grow and spread, it's really important that you top the weeds, because that first year after you clear a piece of property, you're going to have an explosion of those pretty much useless broadleaf weeds. There's going to be a lot of poke salad maybe, or pigweed, other things like that, things that most animals don't really care for. And you're going to want to manage those through mowing or just by hand, by topping those weeds. The second year, you'll still have a lot of those weeds, but not quite as many, as long as you manage it. The third year, you're going to have less weeds, and you're going to begin to get more native grasses, the grasses that you really, really want. So it kind of goes from, a lot of weeds the first year, trickles down, and as that's happening, the grass growth begins to grow, and that's what you want. Well, while those native grasses are beginning to get started, it's really important that you top those other weeds. In other words, cut them off before they go to seed. And especially, they're going to grow taller quicker, and they're going to shade out your grasses and kind of stun its growth and set you back a while. So it's really important to go through and top your pasture, that is, trim those weeds so those native grasses can grow. And if you are without heavy equipment like a tractor or a bush hog or some type of implement that you can mow with, there are simple hand tools that can do the job. A swing blade, for instance, is a very, very simple tool. They're pretty inexpensive, easy to find most times, and a lot of times you find them not even used because people don't want to get out there and use them. But anyway, a swing blade is a very simple tool to go through and top weeds with. And don't think you've got to mow every square foot of the pasture. You're just going around and hitting the obnoxious weeds with that swing blade and giving your grass a chance to grow. It's not as time-consuming and laborious as you think, especially if you take little chunks. Do a little bit every day, maybe in the morning times. Take half an hour and go through and top your pasture. In a week's time, you'll get most of the weeds under control, and then those native grasses can flourish. And if you've got the fencing for it, another inexpensive option is to put in some goats, maybe even a donkey or two, or a mule, that tend to eat those weeds as well as the other grasses. And again, if you've got the fence for it, you can put in some hogs. Hogs actually like eating pigweed. I think that's why it's called pigweed. And not only that, they will dig up those thistles. Because at some point, you're probably going to get thistles. Your neighbor's growing them. He doesn't mow them. And pretty soon, those seeds are going to blow over onto your land. And you really need to address that before they start going to seed on your land and spreading. Hogs will eat those thistles. I don't know how they eat them without getting hurt, but they like them, and I'm willing to give them all the thistles they want. And if you can manage it, again, turn them in and let them eat the thistles on their own. Then you don't have to go digging them up. And another good management principle for maintaining your pasture once it gets established is fencing it into smaller sections, maybe a half acre, maybe a quarter acre, and then rotating your animals, whatever you're grazing, whether it's sheep or cows or horses, rotating them intensively. In other words, put them on one section of land, let them eat it down, and then move them quickly to the next section, rotating them around. That's one of the best things that you can do for a newly established pasture land, or an old one for that matter. In this area here, I have four sections that I rotate the animals around in. There's a couple of sections, this one behind me and this one over here, that I probably could cut in half and then have 6 sections, but I rotate my dairy cows around until they have eaten down one section, and then they're quickly moved to the next section, and the cycle continues. Remember, grazing or mowing grass, it sort of stimulates the root growth. When a grass plant gets pruned by mowing or grazing, it causes those roots to say, hey, we need to produce more leaf, and so it produces more leaf, and then you mow it, and it does the same thing, the cycle continues, and so you're basically increasing your root growth, which is good for the top, leaf growth, and that's what you want, leaf growth. That's the whole purpose for a pasture, for grazing food for your animals or for hay for the winter. So in a relatively short amount of time, that's how I went from a wooded, thick, dense piece of property to usable pasture land like this. And you know what? You can do it too. It just takes patience and diligence. I'm Paul Mack. Until next time, I'll talk at you later.